And we have really two homegrown talents in the room to speak to you today on using cover crops, and it can be a daunting task in a small farm with not a lot of area to rotate to, but they're going to cover all that for you. And they've asked me not to spend a lot of time introducing on their directions. And I just wanted to tell you that both of them are well qualified. Jesse Frost has got a book out, the Living Soil Handbook, and Susana Lein has been doing permaculture for 30 years and in 9 different countries, as well as nine states, 6 countries. But anyway, my job is to make sure that you fill these out. And so please do that. I'll pass these out. And it's really amazing, but you can turn these over to the backside and make comments on there. So please do that. I'm going to turn it over to Jesse.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, we feel like we could do a totally all-day pre-conference workshop. There's so much to cover. But we're going to go back to back. Oh, you're going to say that.
No, that's fine.
So jot down your questions so that we have time at the end, because we're going to each summarize our experience as much as we can in 30 minutes, and then ample time at the end.
Yeah, thanks to David. Thank you, David, and please fill those out. I know that's super helpful for Oak. Thank you to Oak and everybody for having us and doing this particular talk. Small scale cover crop. Obviously, the reason this is important, like we could talk about cover crops on many different scales, but when your space is limited, putting in a crop that is not necessarily going to earn you money is complicated. So we're going to talk about some of the ways in which we do that on our farm. First, I should start out by saying, like Susana said, there's only so much about cover cropping that we're going to be able to do in our time. I'm going to do 30 minutes, and then Susana's going to follow up immediately. So like she said, if you have any questions, go ahead and jot those down, and we'll try and cover all of that at the same time at the end. So basically, I'm the author of the Living Soil Handbook. I do cover more about cover crops in this book. And also, we no-till growers, you'll see our booth is out there if you want to pick up a copy, but also our whole thing is we do videos and we do podcasts, and we try and keep it free and open to the public. Any buying of books or buying of hats and that sort of stuff supports that work. And it's also got a lot of information in it. So just a little bit about our farm, Rough Draft Farmstead. It's run by my wife and myself. We co-farm together, and we have one full-time employee, Greg, who's coming back again this year. And basically, we are, most of you will know these things about Kentucky, right? Sorry, I skipped a slide, but we grow certified organic, mixed vegetables. So, we don't, since we're certified organic, we don't have any option of spraying down, not that we would either way, but we just don't even have that in our toolbox. So, about 30 to 50% of our fertility is derived from cover crops. That changes year to year and sometimes based on my whims. Our beds are 4 foot by 50 foot permanent beds. That will come into play later because doing cover cropping on permanent raised beds is more complicated than necessarily doing it on a field when you can run a big tractor over all of it because your pathways and your edges of your beds cause certain issues. And we have about a half an acre in total bed surface. I say we have about an acre in production, but part of that acre is a small soccer field for our kids, so I don't know if that technically counts. Most of you all will know this a little bit, like just about Kentucky's climate, but we're in zone 6B. We get very heavy rain events sometimes, so not unusual to get 3 inches or so in a few hours. Usually, those last, 4 out of the last 5 years have been over 50 inches. One of them was 70 inches of rain. So, and you all know that, but one of the things that's important to know about, especially in terms of cover cropping, is that we do get cold winters without a lot of snow cover a lot of times, but with a decent frost freeze cycle. That will play a role in terminating crops that are more winter kill. For instance, oats doesn't reliably winter kill here. Our frost freeze cycles are not intense enough or consistent enough to always kill oats. So sometimes you'll plant oats and peas, and in the spring you'll have oats, which is not exactly the goal. So those are just important contextual things. About our ground here, you can see, let me see if my little clicker will work here. Okay, so that's super fancy. So we have a few slow rotation plots, so I think there's 5 of them. And those are for slow rotation crops, like your potatoes, your sweet potatoes, garlic, that sort of stuff. And we keep those separate from our high rotation plots. Oops, I'm going to hit the wrong button every time. Which are these beds right through here. These are all just closer to our wash pack. They're high rotation, meaning we're doing lettuce, carrots, green onions, summer squashes, that sort of stuff. Stuff that's usually like 60 days to maturity or below goes in those beds. Now, for the most part, we're using the majority of our cover crops are going in those slow rotation plots, but we do try to incorporate them, even like rye and vetch, some of those longer overwintered cover crops. As often as we can, we get at least a handful of beds in our high rotation stuff with those in it, especially this is a new farm. We've been here since 2020. This area just has no interest in drying out. So we've been cover cropping it and to try and build up that soil organic matter and try and utilize some of that water and push it through. So the cover crops we use, here's a list. You're welcome to take a picture because I'm going to kind of go through it pretty quick. So for summer, we do like buckwheat to hold a place. We don't use a lot of buckwheat, but it's great. It's a 25-day to flower crop. It's good for beneficials. Sometimes maybe I have a lettuce going into that bed and it's just not quite there yet. Or maybe it's 100 degrees that week and I'm like, okay, well, let's wait a couple weeks or whatever it needs to be and then I'll plant it. So I'll put some buckwheat down. We'll use some summer mixes to prepare, like sorghum Sudan grass and sun hemp and those sorts of things. We'll use those to prepare for like fall plantings of garlic. And I'll run through one of these sequences here in a second. And then we'll also use beans and, various corn, millet, anything I have left over. Sometimes I'll throw squashes in there. The reason that you often separate, the reason that species of cover crops are not the same as species of vegetables more often than not is you don't want to you don't want to cultivate diseases, right? So you don't want to plant, I do use squashes in some of our cover crops, but nowhere that I'm going to grow squashes. So just because it fills in the space at the bottom and things like that. But generally speaking, you want families that are not the same, so you're not, incubating a disease and then trying to plant into that. So for overwinter, rye, vetch, Austrian winter pea, not the same as field peas. Austrian winter peas are very hardy. Crimson clover, winter wheat, lacy phacelia, if you plant that in the late winter, you won't get a flower otherwise, and it isn't that hardy. But if you do, I know that flower growers will sometimes plant it for early spring flowers because it's got a really pretty little flower on it. Red clover and crimson clover, oversowed in Nebraskas, we'll talk about that in a minute. And then for winter kill cover crops, field peas, and like I said, oats do not reliably winter kill here. You can also throw in some like beets and other things that are easy to terminate. But generally for us, like if I'm overwintering, or if I'm in a winter kill, I'll just go with peas or something or a summer cover crop that I know if it's early enough, I can plant a summer cover crop in the winter, we'll kill it. Some sequences here. So this is just an example. We change this up, but this would just be an example. So we do like a summer cover crop, usually like a Sudan grass based. Maybe we often throw okra in there too because we have a lot of extra okra seed, sunflowers, maybe some various beans, some legumes. So we do that and then we'd kill it, and I'll talk about termination in a minute, but we'd kill it and then plant garlic. And then after the garlic comes out in July, we will plant our winter squash. We can do that in our region. It's pushing it any further north. You probably wouldn't have enough time to really get, at least not any of your long season winter squash in, but we'll pull it out and pull the garlic in early July, flip it to winter squash immediately because we're not tilling. We're just pulling the crop out, cleaning up the weeds, and then replanting. And then maybe after that, we put in a winter cover crop. Something that would winter kill preferably, and then if it didn't, we'd go with mid-season potatoes. If it did winter kill, we could go with early potatoes, but let's say we'd put in a rye vetch, then we would do like a mid-season potato, so that would go in around June, and then we'd do summer cover crops again, and then a fall brassica with a cover crop. So you see, like, basically we're just trying in those slow rotation plots to put a cover crop between basically everything. Another one real quick. So this is also in the slow rotation plot. We do like a winter cover crop, and then we do our tomatoes. So this spring we have 3 or 4 beds that we'll put that are in rye vetch right now. We'll kill those, and then we'll plant tomatoes. And then after the tomatoes come out, we'd put in a summer cover crop, and then that's when we'd start maybe that garlic cycle. You know, a high rotation plot one could be like we try and get 3 or 4 crops out of the same bed. So let's say we plant carrots in March. We usually do those in the first week of March, second week of March is our first round of carrots. So we do that, let's say March 15th. And then those are usually out by like mid-May or early June. Then we do a round of lettuce, and in June, lettuce is like super fast because we got so much sunlight. So we'd probably by August be planting that to beets by like mid-August at latest, depending on what lettuce it was. And then maybe we need a little time, just a little break through the heat and get that buckwheat in there. Replenish the soil a little bit, but also just keep it covered, maybe just for us to take a breath in August when we start planting green onions for the fall. And then after the green onions, maybe we get a pea cover crop in there, and even if we have space, we'll just sow it right in between the rows of green onions. And if there's time, you don't want to do that too early because it will overtake your onions, but if you sow them by mid-September, then you'll get a good stand. Latest we sow peas here would be like early October, and even then you're kind of risking it. Like we don't quite get the growth for any sort of above ground biomass, really. Like some years we do, but generally we want it sowed by mid-September if possible. And I just did that one. Okay, and let's see, I put this in to confuse myself. No, this one is, this is actually my buddy Evan Chinder in the Culinary Gardener. So I mentioned over sowing with crimson clover on your brassicas and stuff. This is chicory, radicchio, and he had over sowed it with crimson clover there. And so basically we did this with our brassicas. I just didn't have a good picture this morning when I had this idea to put this in the presentation, but you're planting whatever fall brassicas, any of these later season crops that you're going to cut out or they're going to be gone for most of the winter, and you're just undersowing a little bit of the red crimson clover, and then those will die, and then the plants will die, the radicchio or whatever, it'll get cut out, the rest of it'll die, and then in the spring you'll get a nice growth of the crimson clover. We always treat our cover crops like cash crops as much as we can. Good soil preparation, right? You don't want to, cash crops are not just going to save everything, right? Or cover crops. Cash crops will save everything. Cover crops, you need good soil preparation so that you can get good establishment. We tend to, and maybe I can say this and I'll get ahead of myself, but we prefer direct seeding to broadcasting. We like to broad fork those beds if they're compacted because yes, cover crops will help with the compaction, but if you don't have to, if you don't want to force them to do that work, they'd be better off just already dealing with nice loose soil. So we like to broad fork before sowing the cover crop if necessary or if we can. And we'll do some foliar feeding sometimes, just with some compost teas and that sort of stuff, just to get some good biology in there. And I've even experimented with broad forking in situ like this, broad forking at this point. So the roots are already there and established, and they can just sort of dig into those holes. I have no data to say whether or not it's worthwhile. And it's usually in the late spring, so maybe if you need a warm job, it's worth it. But just experimenting with that, and I'm trying to figure out a way to get good data of whether or not it's useful. For overwintering, we do this is going to be the big focus for just the rest of this talk is kind of just terminating these crops, because winter is going to kill most of your summer cover crops, or you can mow most of them down, or your winter kill cover crops. But really the complicated thing is how the heck do you get rid of, rye, vetch, Austrian winter pea, crimson clover, these sorts of things without tillage, right? So since we don't do a lot of tillage, I'm going to talk about a low till option. But since we don't do any sort of deep tillage, any sort of rototilling, we had to figure out different ways to do this. And there are several different options. I do want to point this out. Sometimes people are like, oh, just kill it at milk stage. And then you're like, okay, what's milk stage? So this is milk stage. Basically, after flowering and after you see the pollen, you'll start to see the yellow pollen. And I'll play this again just so you can see it because it's kind of happens fast. But it's right there. You'll feel the seed pods. They start to fill up a little bit. This is when, but before they get like doughy or hard, you want them to be, as soon as you can squeeze them, they'll feel like empty at first, and then they'll start to feel like full, and that's when you get to milk stage. And that is when the plant is the most vulnerable. And that goes for wheats and a lot of other stuff, but rye in particular. That's when the plant is putting its most energy into producing seed, and you're not going to let it do that, because if you produce seed, then you've got a nice stand of weeds that you've planted. So permanent beds, like I said, complicate things a little bit when it comes to cover crop termination. And you can see us here. There's Greg and I. And this is all part of some different trials I've done where in this one's pretty common. You'll see this a lot. This rye's a little short, but it was fully at milk stage. This was a really compacted area. So basically, one of the things that we did here, though, is basically you tie like a piece of like a fence post, a T-post rather, or something heavy metal or wood to your foot, and you stomp it down with a partner, in this case, our employee Greg, and then you're just smashing it to the ground trying to crimp it. I don't like that. I don't like asking Greg to do that on like a 100-degree day. Like it's not very efficient. It's very labor intensive. And to have ask your employees to do stuff like that in Kentucky, and this year it was like 95 degrees in May, all May. It was just a lot. Like I think it can be effective, but it was a little bit much. And it generally, like we've done it in the past. Some years it's fine. It's like nice weather, but usually like it's just a lot. You know, we have a lot of other things going on. So I've tried to find some faster ways using what we already own. So like in this case, this is the BCS. On our BCS is a power harrow. Now the power harrow is raised all the way up, and it's not touching the soil at all. It's probably 4 or 5 inches above the soil, and we have it rotating, and it is effectively kind of smashing it, stomping it. I don't really know what to say. It's like clobbering it. Call it my clobber method. And what it does is it kind of spreads it out a little bit. Sorry, this video is a little shaky, but spreads it out a little bit and kind of just, gives you a little bit of surface cover. And it does miss a little bit on the sides. You have to be careful about that. Like sometimes we have to go back over. But it pulls in from the sides a little bit better. And, it's not a tool I would buy for this particular job, but since we own it, it works really well. And it also just gives us another option to do these. We can do this bed in 30 seconds. Like a 50-foot bed goes really fast. And it's just so much less work on our employees and on myself. And it's not it can terminate just on its own. We do still couple it with the tarp, which you'll see in a second. And you see it kind of spreads out. It's a little bit thin, and I'll talk about this in a minute. Just cover crop, this one in particular was thin, but a lot of cover crops here are rarely enough mulch to actually block out all your weeds. Like sometimes you need some supplemental something. Oh, good, that's a video. That doesn't seem very useful, but that's a video for you. A lot of these, after we've got them crimped to the ground, we throw a tarp over top of them for a few weeks. This year, May, it took 2 weeks. Some years, it'll take 3 or 4, depending on if it's sunny out, basically, and if it's not warm. And we throw tarps over them. And you'll see, like, these are the ones, how puffed up that is. Those are the ones we stomped by foot. And this has been my experience, even when the rye is taller, that it doesn't really smash it firmly enough to the ground. And it still dies, but you're left with this kind of, like, moundy rye. And unless it's really tall, like, I think it would work better if it were really tall. But you can see these are the ones that we ran over, those two next to Greg and our son further there. Those are the ones we ran over with the rotary plow, and it just flattens it way better. So we ended up just going over all the others. If it is green, it won't get bound up in your rotary plow if you're going to, or the power harrow rather, if you're going to use that. If it is dry like this, it will bind up really badly. So don't do that. I would do it if you're going to use that method or anything that's using some sort of rotary. You definitely want to do it while it's green, and it's not going to bind up as bad. And then this other one, this is just an experiment. We threw some, oh, where's my light? Well, anyway, the one on the right is a, oh, maybe it's because it's a video. The one on the right is a, we put compost over top of that, and interestingly enough, after we tarped it, that was the only one that rye grew back in. But everything, the tomatoes that we put in there afterward did better than any of the others. So, I don't know. When rye goes back in our region, it's generally not a big deal. Like, it's just not aggressive enough, and you can just pop it out if you have the time. Like, if you're not doing this on a large-scale acreage, like a little bit of rye is not a problem for us. Let me see how I'm doing on time. 10 minutes, I'm good. All right, so solarization instead of occultation. We've done some solarization options, so like using old greenhouse plastic to try and burn it down really fast. Instead of occultation being the black opaque silage tarps, solarization being the clear plastic that you would have on a tunnel. And basically what we found is that it's, in our 2 small trials that we did, weed germination was greater under the solarized spot, and I think that's just because it was heating the soil so much more at a greater depth, so weeds that wouldn't normally germinate were germinating. And so we were getting more weed population, so maybe we could have left it on longer. But the thing with solarization is that the studies show like 12 to 14 days and you're going to start having some negative effects on your microbial populations under the soil. So you don't really want to do it any longer than like 2 weeks, and at 2 weeks it's not enough. So anyway, that's been our, experience with it. And like I said, in our climate, the crop residue that we have, the amount that we use that we get from cover crops is rarely enough. Like more often than not, we will add an additional mulch layer. So that would be like hay or straw or whatever you feel comfortable using, or maybe even compost, or maybe composting over top of a cover crop's great if you have that compost. There's no reason not to. That's a great way to establish beds. Like if you have really compacted area and you wanted to plow that up and establish a cover crop, and then the next year establish permanent no-till beds and put some good compost over top of that, you'd have a really great experience that way. It would prove to be very good, healthy soil, I hope. So terminating cover crops before they're ready, i.e. before milk stage, requires mowing or crimping if they're tall enough, and then covering. So basically, you don't have a lot of options. Up until milk stage, you just have like really beautiful sod. And if you want to do anything with this, like at this stage, you've got to get creative, or you've got to involve some tillage. So you could, in theory, mow this and solarize it or tarp it. It does work, but you're going to need a lot more time, because when it's at this stage, you're talking about like March, April. Like you're not getting the sunlight and temperatures that you would need to terminate it with a tarp. So effectively, you have to do something else. So like I said, there's no easy way to do this without covering or light surface tillage, and it's usually too early in the season for a tarp to work. And this also leads to the importance of choosing the right cover crops. Oftentimes in the spring, people will write and be like, okay, so I need to plant potatoes and I've got like this level of rye, and I'm like, well, so we should go back into the fall and start over, because it's just tough. Like it's tough like I said, that's like grass growing. So you really want to think about which cover crops you're using. Crop planting just comes in, it's really important in that situation. You have to know what's going to be in there and when you want it in there the next year. Otherwise, you're just growing weeds. And so I want to talk about our like mow light, tillage method. And basically what we do, again, sorry for the shaky video. I thought it was super slick when I shot it, but it's proving to not be so. So pretty tall rye. This is Greg's like 6'4", so this is like roughly 6 foot. Really nice vetch, partially crimped by the children, and who love to play in it. We planted a garden for our oldest, and we asked him what he wanted to grow, and he's like, cover crops. That's it. They love cover crops. So anyway, we mow it twice. We mow it once with a flail mower. Sometimes it can be really thick and the flail mower won't work, or you'll have to raise the flail mower up really high to just be able to get through it, or you'll just have to use a different mower or a scythe or something, something that is, going to get through there. But we'll mow it once, and then we'll wait about a week, and then we'll mow it again. So basically, we tempt the rye to come back, and then we mow it again and punish it, and which is not nice, but and then what we'll do, and this is where and that can work. Like if you wanted to if you had loose enough soil at that point, you could go through, pick out whatever rye still has some green on it, and then plant whatever crop you had in mind. Like if you just go ahead and transplant, if you wanted to, and if you're not trying to, I don't know, have some super precision, like a pinpoint seeder or something, because it can be really hard. Anyway, for this, like I said, we mowed it twice, and then we took that same power harrow, which I use a lot for cover crops apparently, and you can see it's set just like 2 inches, maybe a little bit more, and maybe 3, and it's basically just trying to knock those roots a little bit and prepare the soil a little bit. And the goal here, I should also say after we mowed it the second time, we just raked off the extra mulch. Because mulch isn't really the goal for us in this particular situation. We're trying to build the soil organic matter in this plot, and we're mowing those cover crops, raking off the top residue, because the top residue is not anywhere near what you're getting below ground. What you see above ground is like a partial reflection of what's going on under the soil. So we're raking a little bit of that off. And then we have these perfect beds that we just go ahead and immediately put new photosynthesizing plants into. They're out of production for a week, which is pretty fast for a cover crop termination. It's not instant. It could be, I guess, in theory, but yeah, mow it again. Sometimes that's enough, but generally we mow it again, and then that light preparation with the power harrow just to make it super fast for planting. And then we plant out, in this case, a bunch of Salanova. You can also see here, this is the last little thing I'm going to talk about. I've got 4 minutes. It has abandoned us. That's all right. The last thing I'm going to talk about, because you can kind of see them here, they're getting reestablished. After we raked all that mulch into our pathways, we lost our living pathways. Almost everything in our intensive plantings is living pathways. It kind of spawned out of perennial cover crops. This is a big idea that a lot of, some agronomists have talked about and people have theorized about, this idea of perennial cover cropping. And I've tried it with a bunch of different stuff and different, clovers and that sort of stuff. I don't know what it is. I'm speculating when I say I don't think that the crops that we breed are strong enough to manage in really, really intense competition like that. But I do like the theory, and I think it's a good idea because you can get a lot of biodiversity if you were planting directly into essentially a lawn. So what we've kind of, developed is our own system of living pathways. And that's kind of our perennial cover crop. So it's a lot of white clover. It's some native grasses. You can even see there's some plantain there. And there's some red clover and et cetera. And the idea being is that the beds themselves are empty. We cut those out and we plant whatever we need. But on the pathways, we're gathering, it's nonstop photosynthesis. So it's gathering all that carbon out of the soil, out of the air, putting it in the soil, so the plants in the beds can get into that if they need to. Now, there's a lot to that, and I won't have time to get into that now. I do get into it a little bit in the book, and I do talk a little bit about it in on our videos. Actually, I think I have 3 living pathway videos. So if you want more information about how we manage that in our mower and our edger and all of those things, those are good places to find that. And the idea is just to reiterate, since I have maybe 1 more minute, is we want all that theoretical value of perennial cover cropping, but we want it in a actual production scenario. So where it's actually good for holding water. In our old farm where we had issues with it drained almost too well, they actually would steal the water. But this farm where it doesn't drain that well, it's been a good combination. So it may work for some people, it may not. And I'm not necessarily saying go out and just let your pathways go bonkers, but it's been pretty effective for us, and it's beautiful. It's like working in a park. And yeah, it has its ups and downs. Obviously, like sometimes we get seeds, sometimes we get perennial weeds that try and work their ways into the beds. But as long as you stay on your mowing and your pathway, your edging, then it usually stays pretty crisp. And like I said, if you all have questions about that, we can cover that at the end. But for now, maybe Anthony, you can switch it over to Susana's presentation, and then Susana will present for the next half hour, and then we'll take questions.
Oh my gosh, you gotta go to the beginning though. Well, you're getting that up. I'll just start. You're gonna see some similarities. I've jotted down some notes. Just, we exchange slides, but it's really great to see there's gonna be some differences too. Even though we're I'm down near Berea, we're in the same, zone B. There's different microclimates and there's different situations with. A little bit about my farm. Yeah, he's on the first slide. I'm not going to be able to do all the high-tech stuff. As you can see, my slides are a little old-fashioned, too. So I am an off-grid farmer and don't even have internet at the farm, but there is a website. I just wanted to give you a little bit about Salamander Springs Farm, and so you have a background. It's market farming probably for 20 years, CSA market, the farmer's market. Value added has been a very big part, meaning cornmeal, grains, dry beans. So we're gonna discuss the bean field. It's a no-till system that's been going for 20 years. And then I should probably include seed saving. I sell seed through Southern Exposure. Some of you may know my heirloom corn, Kentucky Rainbow. So seed saving has become more of my income in later years. And I'll just say that in the last couple of years, I have been doing a lot more teaching, farm consulting, and hands-on workshops on the farm, and that's freed me up in a way to have a lot less intensive bed use and be able to experiment more with my passion, which has been cover crops, because I've been doing this since before we even had oak here in Kentucky. So. Organic no-till has been something that I've been trying. It was inspired by Masanobu. Some of you may know The Natural Way of Farmer and Masanobu Fukioka's work, but the Japanese rice farmer that wrote that book really inspired me to try it. I grew up on a conventional farm. So I have I'm in the Appalachian foothills, so it's mostly forested land. It was an overgrown logged ridge top. I have cleared about 5 acres. Are you all hearing me okay? I just realized I'm not hearing myself. About a third, unless this is a smaller and intensive bed use, a third of an acre and about an acre in the field, the no-till field. So that's enough about that. I want to just say a few things about the philosophy. No-till isn't all of the permaculture philosophy of the closed loop system, and basically that is, it's not just being off grid, but there's not a lot of inputs coming in. It's mostly seeds, even though I do try to save a lot of seeds. I don't buy fertilizers, compost. We'll talk about making compost, but there's not the inputs. And the other thing is non-mechanization. It's a really human scale farm. And so continuous soil cover is really critical, not bringing in those outside inputs. So, and the other main thing is municipal water. You don't have an option of irrigation when you are depending on a 650-gallon spring in the cistern in the woods. I have rainwater catchments, but I built a tiny house, so I've got a lot of roof surface there to collect. So when there's not rain, like there was a drought this summer, then those don't fill. So I want to this is the last slide about, whoopsie, I'm not very good at these. There we go. So this was not farmland, obviously. It was very cheap Appalachian foothills, so there was no topsoil. So it's really kind of been a case study in, I don't know how to say it, regenerative agriculture, because there wasn't really anything to till into if I'd wanted to start. So that really has been built. I guess I want to say that the depth of the topsoil that was built over these years predominantly has come from the what we now know is that mycorrhizal life that is developed. Jesse said it well. It's really what happens in the root system, the exudates that build organic matter, pumping that carbon into the soil. In the early years, I brought in a lot of horse manure from my neighbor's horse barn. And actually, I'm going to talk about this when we get to the bean field. Too much of a good thing. Too high levels of phosphorus and potassium. I had chicken rotation in my bean field and 18 years of that. So those are things. I make mostly a plant-based compost now, and I only make, like, it seems like a lot to some people, but 6 to 8 yards at my scale even is not a lot. You can't have the option of covering whole bed, building a whole bed, but that's a lot of compost. So it's for covering plantings, sowing plants, like covering seed rows, transplanting, that's the kind of thing it's for. So, yeah, I guess I've said all. I am sorry, I'm not so good at this. I'm mentioning these because this was in the description that I know some of you read, and that has been important. It's not about cover crops, but I teach about this in workshops on the farm, and the no-till system has been a big part over the years, but in the early years there was no organic matter to absorb those nutrients in water, and so erosive runoff like we've seen in eastern Kentucky was a huge issue because I'm on a slope. So contour swales across the field. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me if I'm back here? When I hear myself, I guess I feel like you can't hear me, but if you can't hear me in the back, raise your hand. Good. I'm not very good at this. So if you want to learn more about this, the Farm Systems page on the Salamander Springs Farm website is a great place. Actually, that's also, I'll have my slides posted there. There's a woman who does, I don't even have to get on the internet, but she does that. So, and I think the Oak page will have the resource page will have our workshop slides. So this is something I cover a lot in workshops as well. So the contour swales also are useful in the market garden. So you saw them in the fields in the last swale, and they actually are the paths between beds because I'm on a slope. Every situation is different, and you need to deal with that. I've been dealing with a lot of different types of farms these days. But this has been life-changing, really, in building organic matter on my soil. And the absorption of the soil, obviously, the organic matter makes a huge difference. So this is a summer buckwheat mix. Did you call it a placeholder, Jesse? But, I mean, what that means is it's still living roots in the ground. You take it, like this was an onion bed. I grow a lot of onions coming out in July, but you want to put fall brassicas or something a month later. What do? You don't want weeds. Weeds are your cover crop if you don't put something that's easy for you to deal with and also has many benefits. And buckwheat and the mix. When I say the mix, we're going to talk about that first because Jesse alluded to this, and this is really important. We're trying to diversify cover crops, and if you want to mimic the biological system of the prairie, which is really what built the 3 feet of topsoil where I grew up, and now it's down to 6 inches because of tillage, then you are also mimicking the system of not just not just a grass, not just a legume. As much as possible, you get all the species you can in there. And, I love that Jesse does the same thing as me. He's throwing okra if he has extra seed. I do that with cilantro when it goes to seed. I just put it everywhere. It's in these mixes. And dill and things I like to self-sow anyway, flowers, It's a great way to diversify your mycorrhizal food for building carbon in the soil. So you're seeing pictures here of actually this time of year. This is a picture of a mix with rye. You see the clover, the crimson clover is what I've worked with. There's other clovers, but I mostly work with what I can locally get available because of the scale. But it has to be an annual clover or a biennial one that's going to kill. Like crimson is not red clover, that's a biennial. But in any case, I don't know if the pictures don't look so good, but there's some silvery things. That's the Austrian winter pea. That's about the size they are. They're all about the same size right now. And then the mix with the winter kill oats. This is a difference of some things that I've gone through in the whole learning process with winter killing oats, but that's a picture with the same thing. What you're seeing there is, I see down at the bottom, on that bottom photo, there's some kale left in the mix. They were taken at the same time, but the brassica is already winter killed in the rye mix, but they didn't in this one because the oats were tall and gave it a shelter. Turnip, that picture doesn't happen to have turnip, I think it's kale, but in any case, that was part of the mix, but then, I'm harvesting daikons for market until about January, and then it's all over. Then they become that. Some of you already know daikon radish. Their name locally is tiller radish at the farm store because they go down and break up that hard pan and let organic matter get down deep. So they're lovely that way, but they're also great for the market. I want to just say a few more things on this slide. I know it's boring, but the broadleafs are a wide thing, and Jesse both, he's always just talking about the food crop is your cover crop. And you think about your food crop. I've got corn listed, not GMO corn, but they say that sorghum and heirloom corn are one of the best mycorrhizal foods. So it's the grass. I'm going to talk about the cornfield. I have a polyculture that's I lived a long time in Latin America, and it's based on a milpa system there that a lot of people call Three Sisters here. It's much more diverse than that. But that is so important in that, so that's the grass. But down here in the broadleaf, of course, so many of the crops. He was talking about squash, squash is in my cornfield, but, you're considering that part of your cover on the bed and then trying to supplement it as much as you can for the efficiency of market production, right? And so flowers, self-sowers, sunflowers, when I talk about poultry, that was a big part of the poultry feed. Buckwheat's that placeholder. It's the most popular broadleaf. But brassicas, I just want to make special mention. I believe you or Daniel in his book have mentioned this, but they are special because they are biofumigants. Their role in soil biology is awesome because they actually help repel soil-borne diseases, like fusarium, things like that. So their exudates are something you want in the ground. And I think it's great because kale and broccoli are considered so healthy for the human biome. It's the very same compound, so it makes a little sense. And then lastly, umbels, because they're the self-sowers that we were mentioning earlier. We just throw them everywhere, and they're also awesome for, bringing in predatory wasps. All of those umbel family, they're really great to add to this mix. And they don't, if you're putting them on something where they're not going to shade anything because they're so... flax is another one I use that way. I love putting flax in all my mixes because, it's not a biomass, it's just an addition of, and who knows what it does underground. We don't know that, but some of you who are going to go on to school are going to research those things. So, winter killing oats. First let me say, I'm going to go through the cycle of the seasons. That was the easiest thing for me to come up with in this short-term thing. It's such a hard thing for both Jesse and I to really go fast on this. So we really hope we can give you more. But we're going to have lots of time for questions this way. The oat mix that you see there is from this year. And then, going through the season, there's rye in March, and then, the flowering stage when you get the most nitrogen fixed on the crimson clover. But let me start by saying that oats is something that I was frustrated made me experience with a disagreeable experience with the big silage tarp because it didn't winter kill. I need to get popcorn in the field earlier because I can't cross-pollinate between my fields. And I was depending on oats because I don't bring in mulch other than leaf mulch, I gather. So I want a lot of carbon on the soil there in the spring. So anyway, I learned spring oats. I was getting fall oat varieties from the feed store, And spring oats, I think it's something about the vernalization. The other thing I believe, and I don't know, I mean, this is something we probably should talk about later, but you know how peas are much more hardy when they're really small? I think it's the same with oats, because I had oats in way too late. And actually, it wasn't helping me much anyway. I have to make sure the oats get out there by the end of August, because that way they're really fast growing. That's a lovely thing. They only take 60 days, and by frost, I mean, I actually, this winter mix, there's one of these beds that's really right outside my house, and the birds, the forage that those oats provided for the birds was a lovely thing. So getting them close to maturity is, the winter kill's gonna finish them off. They're like, yeah, I guess we better go. So here's another thing about all the issues, and here my situation is different than Jesse's, all the issues of how you deal with this wonderful cover crop called rye. Everybody talks about rye. How do you terminate it? What are all the issues that happen? So 4x4 crimping, this is a friend who came out crimping some beds. I do, a lot with rye for transplanting and for certain field crops. And so how to crimp different situations has been really my biggest issue. So I wrote down some notes because this happens to be a 4x4, a 6x6 that you just roll on the field. The very same thing that Jesse demonstrated, Daniel Mays, a friend of ours, he brought him to my farm, and he described that iron bar method that you saw, and I tried it, and I had a hard time. Well, the other disadvantage for me is it's only me on the farm until I have, college internship programs and things don't happen that time of the season. So a one-person thing is a very great thing. And for me, the other thing was control of how that rye laid down. If it was flopping all over the paths and not being up on the bed, I have a very thick rye stand. So my theory on this, which actually Jesse and I have talked about this, he says, I broadcast sow, and it is a very thick stand. So the rye is it's weak. It's really tall, as rye very is, but it's very weak stem, so I feel like it crimps easier. I'm also on a south-facing slope. But I feel like the biggest reason that there's less of an issue for me with termination is I'm not mechanized, so the equipment I don't have to worry about that being an issue, as long as the crop that I'm transplanting into it isn't impeded by photosynthesis, isn't getting, enough sunlight, there's that much rye trying to stand back up. I don't care. It's because that early milk stage really only lasts, for me, the second week of May, man, it's all over for rye on my south-facing slope. I mean, it's from Russia originally, so Kentucky's a little hot, but it looks chaotic at that early stage. It might look a little chaotic, but then it dies back. So that said, when I want to really make sure it goes flat, more often I'm using scraps from changing the plastic on my hoop house. They're 40-foot lengths. I didn't say that earlier. Most of my beds are about 40-foot lengths. The 30 to 36, I've got one even 48. That's because of the contour swales and just working with a slope, which is an issue. So both of these beds probably were tomatoes because there's iron stakes there, and that has been, it's like, you're going to stake your tomatoes anyway, well, why don't you use it just to make that rye stay down? So the combination of that has been helpful for me. But like I said, this is a mechanization thing, this is a scale thing, and there's actually a lot. I would love in our discussion to talk about roller crimpers for small scale farms. I think Jesse has experiment with a lot of things, but even smaller than that, like if you don't have the ability to buy the mechanized stuff, there's one thing that I've seen at I think at Tractor Supply and those places that it's like a landscaper's thing. It's called a lawn roller. You fill it with water, and it's like 400 pounds, so they can get, they're like 36-inch wide. That's a possibility, because I'm going to show you another method when I get to the bean field that I'm using, and I'd like to improve on that. So the picture here on the right, the rye you see on the other bed is falling over. That's what happens for me by the middle of MA, because the stand is so thick and so weak, it starts to fall over. And that's not a problem on my beds, because it's pretty easy to control if I'm rolling it the way I showed you, but it is a problem in the field, because if it's falling all over the place, I want something that's going to stand into the sweet potatoes in the bean field. Usually we get to last, and by then that's, so triticale is the cross between wheat and rye. It's kind of like, in between the heights of each of them. Those are, that's a nice thing for the mix for my field that we're going to get into. It looks the same. The mix is similar, except for it's triticale instead of, instead of rye. Oh, so here's a picture of it out in the field. So this is here's my hack for roller crimper in a big field. Heavy oak pallet with a rope. You can put some weights on it for an extra workout. And it makes sure you crimp that rye down. But by now the rye doesn't need as much encouragement. So that's how the field is done. But, the roller would be nice. Although 400 pounds of water rolling down my slope might be a little weird. Anyway, I feel like I need to look this way. This is basically the rye laid down, and this is the time we start thinking about polyculture on the, Jesse, you called this what, slow rotation? Those long-term crops like tomatoes and stuff like that, time to intercrop. I will say I usually get at least 6 weeks. The great thing, when I used to scythe my cover crop, that's what I did before I tried to imitate rolling crimping, and that was a game changer. But I also have to say I've benefited now from more than 20 years of no-till, no disturbance, very little disturbance. So weed seeds aren't brought to the surface. So that is a benefit. So weed suppression, it's not so, well, maybe you could ask some Berea College students here about their experience of how much they weed on my farm. Sorry to put pressure on you. Yeah, so luckily that's not an issue, because weeding, I hate weeding in July in the heat of, yeah. So triticale is this to the right. You don't see a lot of difference. I put a close-up picture there so you can see the end of that, transplanting in squash in that bed. So they look a little yellow, but they aren't yellow. All these slides look so light. But, okay, so yeah, the weed suppression time comes to you want to diversify the cover crop. And these are a lot of, it's just a clug. I wish I had better pictures, because we've done some experimenting this last couple years. But one of the things I want to put in here came from either your or Daniel's book, Daniel Mays. I'm going to refer to him a lot. He wrote a book. What's the name of that? The organic no-till vegetable. Jesse brought him out to my farm when he did an event on his farm, and he talked about that iron crimper. And he also, I remember sweet alyssum is an idea he had for an intercropping. It's a very low, very tiny flowered, good for pollinators. That's a flower that's in here. I'm not seeing, oh yeah, it's up front, it's white. Low-growing salvias, things that you want to put in that understory of tall-growing long-term crops. Especially if I do a Florida weed where they're pruned up. And so there's that understory where you can get an immense amount of diversity on your bed. And that is so important. We do not want even if I've got a very diverse, like one bed's one thing, the next bed's not that, we want non-lonely, I call it not being lonely monocultures, that they need that diverse mycorrhizal. If you're depending on your nutrients like me coming from the soil to, give you that nitrogen that's not, it's not even identified in a soil test, you don't have to worry about it if you're feeding the soil, a diverse, like you're mimicking the natural prairie. So anyway, these are examples of a lot of crops. Some of this, I call it the shady side and the sunny side because my beds, all these beds are on contour down a south-facing slope because I did, a lot of passive solar things. So that has been important for me too with this because, you've got the things that really like that shade in the summer, like beets and carrots and, the backside, what I call. You see the picture off to the right here, the October, they're now getting sun because it's probably a frost on those tomatoes. And they have the diversity of the flowers and the, different greens. And, once again, you got your umbels, anything else you can get there. I have a self-sowing wild arugula that is really good. And all of those things are really good to intercrop a bed. I'm going to say two other things. Intercropping, most of my ginger and turmeric goes in the hoop house, but intercropping in between tomatoes, in the tropics they like to be in the shade, even though they're very hot, heat-loving crops, so that works. So that picture off to the left, when I say planting in rye mulch, the kinds of things that we're sowing, by this time of year, the rye has detached from its roots. It's still there. You're sowing them right on where those rye roots are still there. It's just several weeks later and they've weakened and so it's easy to scratch that off of the bed. So you have to wait. If you're crimping, you just have to wait a little bit. But it's really worth it for me to have it being crimped because of that massively thick rye and the weed suppression it gives. It's like a sandwich, like inches thick, and that's a lovely thing to protect. That's the armor on the soil that Gabe Brown talks about. So, oh my God, sorry, I keep doing this. There's another picture in July. That would have been buckwheat being a placeholder. This is just a little pictures, I wish I had better, but of how that process happens. And then this is whacked down. I use a weed eater. I also have a sickle bar that Joel sells. I always laugh because I don't get anything but the hand tools. Scythes don't work that well on beds usually, but the weed whacker's great because you can go to the ground. You see this picture down here. We're transplanting. Hallie, you helped do this. We're transplanting into that whacked down buckwheat. But it's buckwheat's not a grass, it's succulent. It's not going to last very long, but it's enough to get those going. But the experiment, Jesse did this too, the experiments that I've done in intersowing crimson clover and flax and, herbs, all of those things, it works great in the kohlrabi and the broccoli. And I don't know if you've got extra seed, that's something I do. Like I have extra millet seed at the end of the year. It doesn't overwinter, you don't get good germination, so you want to use up the rest of that bag. Go ahead and sow something as long as you know it's not going to interfere with, the photosynthetic activity, whatever, of the crop. But this cabbage picture here is September. You can see how I think that was Chinese cabbage. I think it just really fills out the bed. So the clover on that bed just, it kind of shaded it out. But, it held the soil. If we had gotten the flooding rains from eastern Kentucky as bad, it would have been holding the soil. So here's August. We're getting through this. August is this is a picture of the oats in September. That's when you try to get the oats in, and you can see buckwheat is nursing. The crimson clover is going to come on. And then buckwheat, I think I better move through this fast. I'm seeing that I have 8 minutes left. October is buckwheat. This buckwheat is winter killed, frost killed, I should say. It doesn't take anything. It's just a frost. And that's another option, but of course you're lacking the grass in that mix. So Here's the undersowed crimson clover. Jesse thinks showed some of that too. In a brassica bed with flax. You don't see the flax very well, but there's flax all over the place there. There's some oats getting close to maturity in October. Kale on the outer side of the bed makes it easier to harvest. The kale in these beds are so happy. They love to not be by themselves. They're very happy to not be lonely. I don't have a single pet. I mean, they're so tasty. It makes me wonder, you know, the nutrient density is definitely... Anyway, this is beds that are just like, it is really hard to get everything. You know, there's some beds, like Jesse said, where, you know, you want to have roots in the ground all year round, but, you know, when you're transplanting onion seedlings out of your hoop house in sometimes even late February, leaf mulch has been a way to use those beds. And I gather a lot of leaf mulch in November. This bed I think is spring because you see the cover crop, but I also do the same thing for garlic. It's mulched up in November, obviously, when you plant it. And there's another bed lacking the grass, which is why I'm trying so hard to make the oats work. That's why I was really making a lot of effort to learn how to get oats to work where I need it, because I really need to have carbon mulch on my beds, because, well, you got a weed issue if you don't. So, yeah. Well, Jesse already talked about this, and this cardboard option I'll just mention. Yes, that works for potatoes. Mow the rye, use the cardboard, puncture through it a month later. But yeah, tarps can take up to eight weeks. You know, in that early in the spring, it's not warm enough. So, oops. It's good to plan ahead, but sometimes stuff happens. So I have a stockpile. That's one of the policies. I always fill my truck with whatever I can get when I go to town. If I'm going to make a tarp, and I get a lot of cardboard, and it's stockpiled under my corn crib. And that's, you know, it's the way I've originally built my bed. So cardboard is a lovely worm food. So if you can take the time, and it's not too many beds, depends on your scale. I was willing to for this kind, because potatoes are a staple crop. That's, I grow quite a bit of potatoes. So, all right, I'm going to go through these fields really quickly because I want us to have time. I guess we got till 3:30. Okay, it says 2:30 on here. Okay. Anyway, pallet crimper again. There's the corn flattened. I mentioned the scraps of plastic from the hoop house. Those are pieces of tarp that aren't too big, are sometimes used to keep this down as I'm planting, just moving ahead. But a big scale tarp is really hard for somebody like Jesse showed, you know, it wasn't a huge tarp, but, you know, you need a few people. So I'm just, you know, for my system, for this kind of field system, the rye gives up after a while. It looks pretty nice there. And then you got the 6 weeks grace period, and it's time to get something as that rye breaks down in the field. And so summer millet, brassica mix. This is something we did in a soil building workshop in July. Just sowed this in the cover crop. Although this July, this was a previous July. This July, the corn was taller because we had a drought, and then we got a flood. You remember the end of July, so it was late. Anyway, this is the polyculture. I've listed a whole bunch of possibilities. Adding, these are different than, of course, we had in Latin America, but, you know, the pole beans and the squash of many types, the cucumbers are all part of this mix. And, you know, there's so many things that do well in the shade. I've got arugula that comes up everywhere out there. So if you want arugula, just go, you know, pea in the cornfield, because that's a policy. We pea in the cornfield when it gets big, and you eat arugula at the same time. So here's it a little bit later in the season, September. You see some squash, but where the buckwheat is starting to die back. It's getting light in the field, and then by harvest time, the daikons and the turnips, they love, you know, they're getting more sunlight, they take off. And the buckwheat, I don't care, we're going to talk about the bean field real quick. I don't care if buckwheat resows out there, but whacking that buckwheat, I didn't say that in that one picture I put about, you got to make sure you whack that buckwheat when it is flowering on a bed if you're going to plant lettuce there the next year. We know that well, don't we? So pole beans become soup beans as well. They're out there until we have the corn. I have a big corn harvest party on the farm in the fall. It's hand harvested out there, so you can come and enjoy the fun. So here is cover crops, cover crop is the squash, and down the picture that says November, you see the squash is gone. That's when the winter no-till mix comes back. So we're back to rye triticale mix going on you see the corn rows, the stubble of the corn rows in the fall. All right, I'm not going to skip that. That was about the popcorn and the oats needing to be ready. But quickly, I've got 6 slides here for the beans. This, what's that? Okay. What time? Is it 2:39? Okay. All right. November, you're seeing it come up through the bean stubble. This is a similar cycle. I'm not going to go into detail, but there is a couple differences here. And that is, at that stage when the clover, your nitrogen fixers have fixed all their, the majority of the nitrogen that they can fix in the soil is when you're ready to sow your beans. They are sowed into the standing cover crop. I used to do it with wheat because I was like, how the heck am I going to do it with rye? I can talk to you about, but we don't have time. Anyway, it has to be sown in there and then it's crimped down because it needs soil contact. And of course, I try to get that during the rains of May. When you have a drought, makes it more difficult to do this system. There's a lot of things that aren't easy about doing dry beans in Kentucky. That's why, most of them are grown in the upper Midwest. But if you're like me, that you want to get your proteins off of your farm, that's soup beans are an excellent way. So, for market, it's not that efficient. People love it, so I try to do it. But for being self-reliant, if you like I grow black beans and pinto beans, and of course a lot of different other heirlooms on those corn, but this fields, and the cowpeas are later, we're going to see. I'm going to get to the chickens and then we'll quit. So because I have to run through these last few slides really quickly, this article I think Oak is also posting on their resource page. This several years ago was on a no-till panel for Cornell, and they did an awesome article in their Small Farm Quarterly about my relay. They called it relay cropping. I've called it that ever since. And so they, this article really gives you a lot more detail. I mentioned earlier the too much of a good thing with the chicken, the buildup of the phosphorus and the potassium in the soil by rotating those chickens through this field in over 18 years. And that actually isn't in there at that time. This was 4 years ago, but there's a lot of things that are very similar to that article, so it'll get you a lot better idea. But it's an example of the closed loop system. The chickens are eating your cover crop. They're getting their food from that, the wheat and the rye in the spring to the buckwheat. They eat the green cowpeas. Of course, you saw some amaranth and sorghum and a lot of other things, but there's too much complexity to get into here. But this gives you an idea of that rotation system and moving the electric fences and moving them through, planting the bean crop, the cowpea crop after them. And let me go through. There's, you see the beans coming up through the laid down straw. Chickens again at the top. You see they've just been moved. So now that probably was planted. Now they're tearing that up. And the buckwheat patches are coming to flower, and then they become forage up here. Late July is usually when they eat that. Yeah. Let's just go. In harvest window, you learn a lot about dry bean harvest. You start harvesting before, in Kentucky with the moisture, before they're all dry because you might get a big rain and you got to get them all out of the field. So you get a lot more. I'm going to just say you get a ton more production this way, because if you need mechanization, you got these wide rows. So, and you're also building your soil life. So this is that intermediate crop. This is one other important thing. If you're doing dry beans, of course, they're coming out of the field in August. You need to get the winter cover crop in October. You've got a window. Once again, buckwheat mix comes to the rescue. This is just learning on the farm, skills workshops. There's that article again. Getting soil contact by having to dance. I could talk about sorghum Sudan. We could talk about that if anybody's interested later. But that's the end of the cycle. We're back to January. Thank you.
I think we can take some questions. I love watching your presentations every time. They're so inspiring. You can see we're going to walk outside and it's going to be winter and we're going to be like, oh, dang it. Right. There's all that greenery. So does anybody have any questions? Blake?
Oh, there's a slide to put up at the end.
Oh, here.
Resource slide.
Oh. I hit a button.
And we can go back on that one too if we want to. Because,
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah, this has his book.
Oh, and the no-till organic vegetable farm. Yeah, there it is.
I think I sent this to you.
Yeah.
So I didn't even mention Gabe Brown. We can talk about it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so we can take some questions. Blake, did you want to start?
So besides the fact that it's non-mechanized, is there any real benefit to crimping other than as opposed to mowing it, like a rye cover crop?
Okay, so the question is there any? Yeah, I'll do that, David.
Are
Thank
you
you.
asking? Okay.
You can answer it if you want. Yeah, the question is there an advantage to crimping versus mowing? When you're crimping it, you're basically pinching the phylum, so it's no longer able to transport those exudates, and the plant will shut down. So if you mow it, you're risking the possibility that it's like you haven't done anything but encourage it to regrow. I mean, is there anything else that I should add to that?
Yeah, I mean, having the living sometimes you don't fully crimp, and so that it still regrows, right? That's the issue we're talking about. There's still life, and it's still having that relationship with the mycorrhiza. That continuity is really important. Yeah, maybe I didn't understand your question, but the first thing the photosynthesis thing I talked about earlier, crimping rye for the crop is important to have the next crop be able to come in and be the one that dominates. I'm not sure if I understood that correctly.
Yeah, just the one of the big things too is like it has to be a good pinch on the stem of the rye, and that's why that chevron shape is often used for the roller crimpers, because if you just did a straight, there it is, it's right there on the top. You can kind of see how it sort of curves in on that roller crimper on that tractor there. If you just had it straight across, it wouldn't have that same pinching effect that you want on the stems if you're talking about crimping. Yeah. And that's why, that's why I like that clobber method, because it pinches so well.
I like clobber.
Yeah.
I like the word.
We don't use it enough in farming. Yeah. Oh, sorry, there was one in the back. And then I'll get to you, I promise.
Where are you all sourcing your cover crop seed? We don't have a great organic supply in the area, so I was just curious.
Yeah, we've gone a few different places. A lot of people use green cover seeds, and we can't use them because they don't sell certified organic seed. If you're not certified organic, that's where you can get it. If you are, we get ours from High Mowing, from Johnny's. We usually order, if we're ordering in bulk, I'm still looking for some different sources, but those have been, I also get some from Fedco. Some of the more rare stuff, let me think, Territorial, I think is where we, Seven Springs Farm Supply, that's another good one. Who else?
Well, I have to say, I am not certified organic. I have made a relationship with my local farm store, Tri-County in Richmond, to start getting some of even the unusual ones. When I first started, there was, daikon radish I had to order way back when. Nobody knew it as tiller radish until Ray Archuleta and some of the NRCS guys made people start using that stuff. But, so Tri-County gets in so many things, but Phacelia, we neither one of us really talked about it. My only experience with Phacelia is to buy a little bit online. The shipping cost is, I didn't save seed from it, so, and I like it, but to diversify a mix with things like that, I have to buy them online. But the rye, so my local, actually even some of the places that you get, I don't know about Johnny's, but I know that Seven Springs or so, in Virginia, where they have a lot of supplies and cover crops. It doesn't have all organic stuff. Grow Appalachia and Berea ordered a bunch through them. So if you want to say something, Derek, I see you back there, Chris, and I don't know if Kayla's in the room, but that's a possibility. So, yeah, go ahead.
For bulk, we've had a lot of luck with Albert Lein and also.
Can you get a microphone? I can't hear you.
What was the other one? So for bulk, we've gotten some of our cover crop mixes here at Kentucky State from, and these are certified organic seed from Welter Seed and Honey and also Albert Lee. And the nice thing about
Pallet
Welter's
shipments? Do you get pallet shipments, or what do you do?
we usually we're talking bushel bags. Yeah, I mean and we're not growing even at the scale you all are, right? I mean we're research plots, and so but 50-pound bags.
Sean Lucas, talk to him.
I might know him. But Welter's will mix custom mixes for you too, which is one of the things I like about them a lot. They're very helpful. You can have long conversations, more than you want to know about cover crops on the phone with Welter's.
Yeah, shipment is an issue for some people. It depends on your scale. So, like I said, do you want to
The only other thing I would add is the cover crops. Basically, any of the cover crops are available conventionally, but if you're certified organic and it's within, and you have to prove that you've looked at the 3 places that you usually buy seeds, it has to be organic. Price cannot be a reason that you buy the non-organic seed. So for certified organic, which is obviously important in this context, it has to be certified organic unless it's something really weird that you can't get, like Sesbania, Lacey Phacelia. Well, although we got our Lacey Phacelia from High Mowing. Sun hemp is one maybe that is harder to find, so anyway.
And some of the other annual clovers like Berseem and Balanzas, I love to experiment with them because they're at different timing, and they would be great to add to a mix because they're like Berseem winter kills, for example. Anyway.
Chris, did you have anything you added?
No,
okay.
the companies that I was going to recommend have already been talked about.
And then I know you had a question.
My question is about your living paths. I know you have the nitrogen fixers and dynamic accumulators I could see from the plants that were in the picture, but if you were to describe your mix, what all is in that?
So we've tried several different things. I've tried chamomile, I've tried thyme, I've tried different various clovers, and in the end, nature's just like, this is what we're doing. It's because it's once you start, like you can get it pretty tall, but in the middle of the summer, when you really start your harvest, you have to mow it down. And once you start mowing it, then whatever's going to come through is going to come through. We haven't had a lot of issues with Bermuda grass and stuff like Johnson grass. You're mowing it too much for that stuff to take off. Bermuda grass could be an issue. We just haven't got there yet. Like I haven't run into it for whatever, been blessed in that way. But it's still something that there's a lot of room to play. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there, and it's still, there's not a ton of people doing it, and I'm still, like I said, on the edge of whether or not I recommend it for most farms. It works. One thing I didn't say about it is the reason that we went with that over, say, like wood chipping, beyond the photosynthesis, like photosynthesis is always going to feed your soil better than anything else. The reason that we went with the living pathways over, say, wood chips or just bare pathways, bare pathways take a ton of work, and they wash out really easily, and they dry out really easy. They're just not great for your soil, or great for your just like work. They're hard to do, hard to manage. Wood chips can be good, but we are on a slope and we get a lot of rain, and they just wash out. and it's just wastes all that work. So with the wood chips, we prefer to slightly decompose those and use those as mulches. And then we'll use them in our pathways in our tunnels and places where we're not on too much of a slope. But yeah, with the living pathways, yeah, I'm still experimenting with varieties. But another thing is, like, sometimes we'll use tarping in places that we have living pathways. This question comes up a lot. So what happens to the living pathways once you tarp them? Since they're mostly perennials, they'll bounce back pretty well. But we also just keep a bag of white clover on hand, and we'll just sprinkle that after we pull the tarp off. So when you pull it off, you'll see it's yellow, it's unhappy, but we'll go through and sprinkle some clover on, and that usually, like, kind of takes it up. And yeah, and if you wanted to put something like buckwheat or something, as long as you were going to go and kill it later on, then that would be fine. Yeah. Question.
So,
Oh, yeah,
I
go
don't
ahead.
know if
No,
you,
I don't-
did you want to hear from me too? So I just have one on my host slope. You've been there, actually. That would be considered living pathways, mainly for, I'm on a slope, right?
Right,
It's
and we are
mainly
too.
for access. It's that wider one. I don't know if you remember, but it's a wider one for access. So it is a mix, and actually, it's an interesting thing, an issue that I had. This is in early years in sowing different clovers and trying to make that a diverse little, it's a wider strip. You often in seed that you buy can get the 1% weed seeds, and I got some Bermuda grass in some of that, but luckily I got it in time, so that's a concern you can have. At least I did. The other thing, yes, I do have mostly all wood chip paths. I am on a steep slope too, but I also have a much more absorbent soil now, and so it really does take the water up, and it's been tested in these last couple of years. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Our soil that we're on now is, like, kind of dense clay, so it just cannot absorb the water. Yeah.
I had a slide that we didn't have time for, but that is like organic matter. What is it? 20,000 gallons per acre of absorption by 1% increase in your organic matter. So that's just like night and day. The erosive capacity of soil. We have nothing much better than a parking lot in most of our ag soils because we mineralize them.
Certified naturally grown over there.
Let's say that somebody has not implemented any cover cropping on their farm, and this is incredible, but like a 5-year goal. Where would you say, start this way? Like, what's the first thing you would advise, maybe one way to, like, incorporate cover crops into your vegetation?
Do you want to start there? Okay, so the question is, like, for a beginner, somebody who wants to implement cover cropping, where would you start? And usually what I would recommend in that situation is you want to look at your crop plan and see where it would fit in. If you have beds that are going to be empty over the winter and you're not going to need them until, say, June, that could be a good opportunity to plant a rye, vetch, something like that, sort of cover crop that's going to overwinter. You do want a termination plan. You want to know how you're going to kill it. You want to know everything that's going to happen. You want to put it in maybe September, depending on what time your beds are empty in the fall, and then you want to plan for how you're going to terminate it in the spring. Another option there is if you know that your beds are going to be empty by September and you want them really early, that's when you'd put something like a pea or other winter kill cover crop, like she was saying with the oats. You get those in early enough and maybe they'd have a better chance of killing in our climate. And so anyway, something like peas and even mix in things like cilantro that don't always die super easy, but they're easy enough to kill in the spring. So it's really looking at your crop plan and seeing where they may fit in, and then also not just throwing them in every empty bed. Like if you went to our farm right now, you will see beds that don't have cover crop in them because I need the beds really early. And maybe I applied a little extra mulch to them, but I will be planting them within the month, like in the beginning of March, they'll start to be loaded up. So I don't like leaving beds fallow any more than I have to, but like everything in what we do, it's like do it as much as possible, as much as reasonable. Like don't beat yourself up too much by leaving a bed fallow for a small amount of time. Is that helpful? Anybody?
We are
Or do you-
about out of time.
Did you, yeah, you can just, yeah, did you want to ask something, Sean?
I see you have a BCS, and we have a couple of them here that we use. And you talked a lot about crimping, but you didn't have a crimper roller for your BCS. And I'm just curious, is there a reason that you choose not to get one? Is it you don't want it oriented, or?
Yeah, so they make a roller crimper for the BCS, and you fill it with water. By all accounts, it is somewhat functional, but your issue, like I sort of said with the beds, because most of our beds are raised, or at least partially raised, your edges, that's what everybody says. You just can't do anything with the edges with that. Maybe you could use it and then use something else, and especially like I said, don't go out and buy the power harrow for this job. That tool in particular would be like $1,000 cheaper or more or less. So you'd want something else that would take care of those sides, though. And maybe that's like a weed whacker or something like that. But from the accounts that I've heard, and I've spoken with several people that have used it, it's relatively effective. It still needs the tarping probably in most cases because it's not quite heavy enough. And yeah, it won't take care of those bed edges.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you have anything to add to that?
He was asking me.
Let's give them a hand.
All right. Way to go.